So hello, everyone. My name is Abigail Miller, and I serve as the Program Coordinator for Secure Community Network. We're grateful to have everyone joining us today for Surviving Hostage Situations webinar. A few notes before we get started is that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available following the conclusion of today's conversation. In addition to relevant resources and materials discussed throughout today's webinar, there will be a link to our website as well as a QR code that you're available to scan for some of those resources as well, which will be emailed to all registrants in follow-up. If you have any questions during the course of our conversation today, please use that Q&A function, and we will work to address as many questions as we can throughout our conversation, as well as the follow-up that I have mentioned. There will be time towards the end of our conversation specifically for Q&A. A few other notes is that all attendees are off video and muted. So again, if you need anything, please make use of the Q&A. To start our conversation today, I will pass it off to our National Director and CEO, Michael Masters.
Abby, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today, all of our participants. Exactly 1 year ago this week, on January 15th, we were, as a community and as a country, dealing with the immediate aftermath of the hostage situation in Colleyville, Texas. 4 members of our community were held hostage for approximately 11 hours that day. We also recognize that in a broader sense, so too was our entire community, held hostage by an ideology filled with hate, motivated by anti-Semitism, and moved to violence. We also recognize from that day, and unfortunately other examples, that we will not choose the time and place of an incident, but we can choose our preparedness. The community of Fort Worth, Texas, Tarrant County, and of Congregation Beth Israel recognize this, and Jewish lives were saved because of it. Working with our federal partners, particularly the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, we at SCN continue to assess that we are facing the most complex and dynamic threat environment ever to face the Jewish community or this nation in our history. But this does not mean we are helpless. Far from it. Over the last 4 years, we have made dramatic progress to ensure the safety and security of our people and our community through the development and deployment of best practice comprehensive security initiatives led by full-time professionals. Efforts like what was undertaken in Fort Worth, where a commitment between the Federation and SCN has ensured that every facility had an assessment, training, and an opportunity to apply for federal grant dollars, to include Congregation Beth Israel. This is part of our collective effort and responsibility to build a proactive protective security shield over the entirety of the Jewish community. It's part of our collective effort through our federation system and in partnership with the Conference of Presidents and its member organizations to ensure that we do not allow an increase in anti-Semitic incidents or the perceived normalization of Jew hatred to become the norm. It's part of our effort to ensure not just the continuation of Jewish life, but its growth and flourishing. Our efforts are enhanced by the partnership with the Jewish Federations of North America every single day in our work with countless federations, 146 and 300 independent communities, and through our ongoing collaboration with the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. We are grateful to both partners for being co-sponsors on today's webinar and that partnership every day, along with those of all of our federations and national partners. I want to also recognize our security directors and law enforcement partners who are working every day to secure our community. A note on our partnership with JFNA and the Live Secure effort, which is expanding that security shield dramatically and working every day in communities across the country to do so. We are so grateful for that partnership and the leadership of Julie Platt and my colleague Eric Fingerhut in making that possible. Together, we are ensuring that whether someone is in a synagogue, a day school, or a summer camp, and whether in New Haven, New Orleans, or New Mexico, they will have a best practice standardized approach overseen by professionals. We are ensuring that people are safe walking into our institutions because every Jewish life matters. We're also ensuring they are able to not only feel comfortable, but proud to be Jewish. Now is not the time to lower the Israeli flags that hang outside our institutions, to take off our kippot, to hide our stars of David, or to remove the mezuzot that hang on our doors. Now is the time to pronounce that we will do things. And in this, the ability to live secure is in our hands, not those who wish us harm. It is now my incredible pleasure to introduce the chair of the Board of Trustees of JFNA, an SCN board member, a phenomenal leader in our community, Julie Platt, She will be followed by Diane Loeb, Chair of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, for opening remarks, also an incredible partner and dear colleague and friend. Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm honored to be here today, as Michael mentioned, as Chair of the Jewish Federations of North America and as a member of the Board of SCAN. Ensuring the safety and security of our communities is one of the essential goals of each of our 146 federations. We are proud to have inspired the creation of SCAN to help our federations fulfill their commitment to build safe and secure communities. And we are grateful for the partnership of the Conference of Presidents in that critical initiative. I also couldn't be more proud of our local federations, who one by one are leading their communities to raise the funds and build the security infrastructure they must have in order for everyone to feel safe participating in Jewish life. To support this effort, our Live Secure initiative, which I am proud to chair, has raised $62 million to assist in the creation of new programs and the enhancement of existing programs, and to support SCAN as it helps each community assess their situation and plan for the security they need. Through Live Secure, we have committed that each community will have a professionally run security initiative within 3 years. Just this year, the Live Secure Committee has made over $11 million in grants and helped start 17 new programs. Finally, we are gratified by the success of the advocacy for the United States federal government's nonprofit security grant program. From a modest beginning, that program is now funded at $350 million, $305 million in 2023, of which we believe over 100 million is reaching the Jewish institutions across the United States. We thank all those community partners who have assisted in this advocacy. We also appreciate that the more support we provide SCAN and the more communities that start security initiatives, the more we will be able to utilize this program. This week's somber anniversary is a reminder not only of the threats to our community, but of the concrete actions we can take to face them. The skills you'll learn in today's webinar are truly life-saving. Thank you for your commitment to keeping our community safe.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Michael. As chair of the Conference of Presidents, I welcome you on behalf of the more than 50 major organizations, including the Jewish Federations of North America, that work to keep the Jewish community strong. As Julie mentioned, we are proud to have helped create what is now the most sophisticated security organization of any North American faith community. Sadly, SCN's sophistication must keep pace with the most complex and dynamic threat environment the Jewish community has faced in modern times. That's why today's webinar is so important, and why it's so important that we all learn as much as we can about how to keep each other safe. The hostage incident at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville 1 year ago followed a string of other horrifying attacks on our community. In 2018, I was serving as chair of HIAS. An individual opposed to our support for refugees opened fire at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, murdering 11 members of the Tree of Life, or Simcha congregation, New Light congregation, and Congregation Dor Hadash. So for me, the security of Jewish institutions is very personal. Nonetheless, we will not be deterred as we go on about living our Jewish lives, and we will not hesitate to live and take joy in our Jewish values of helping others. However, we must be able to do this in a safe and secure fashion. We're grateful for the work of SCN, all of our federations, and the Jewish Federations of North America, and all that all of you do on behalf of the Jewish community. Thank you very much for being here today.
Julie and Diane, thank you both so much for your partnership and that of JFNA and the conference, and the leadership of both, to include Eric and William. The morning of January 15th began like most other Shabbats for the members of Congregation Beth Israel. Indeed, it was only when a radicalized anti-Semite stood up in their services that the members of Congregation Beth Israel, and shortly our entire community and the world, would know that morning and day would not be like many others. 11 hours later, Jeff Cohen, now president of Congregation Beth Israel, Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, and the other hostages would be free and physically uninjured. Let us be clear, though, as Jeff has noted, they were not rescued. They escaped. Jeff has spoken about the value of the training that they received, and he'll speak about that in a minute. But I want to note, in having spent time with Jeff, I can assure everyone on this webinar that it was not just the training. His thoughtfulness, his planning, his mindset, his commitment. We learn from the Talmud, Ein Somhin al Hanes. We don't rely on miracles. We pray for them and we hope for them, but we don't rely on them. This is not a time for just miracles. This is a time for action. Jeff Cohen and the other hostages acted, and in doing so, they saved themselves, and they saved a part of our community. But too many members of our community have not been reached. Every synagogue in America must be trained. Every Jewish facility in America must be prepared. Every member of our community must be ready, just like we do with fire safety. This is exactly the work that we are working to address in partnership at SCN with federations, national partners, and communities across the country, and with partners like Jeff. We don't have time to lose. It's been my privilege to get to know Jeff and his wife. I could not have imagined that one of the most important, and I know lasting things to come out of that eventful day, January 15th, was friendship. I am honored to call him a friend. It is my pleasure and it is my honor to turn it over to Jeff Cohen. Jeff.
Good day, everyone. And see, you're supposed to turn your phone on mute, and this is why you don't stop. Sorry about that. So I'm going to re-echo. I'm going to echo a lot of what Michael just said. Our survival was not a miracle. And frankly, it's a little frustrating when people say it is. Our survival, our escape was due to training, planning, and actually executing some of the things that we had prepared for. So when they did occur, we knew what to do. Now, you can't plan for everything. As a matter of fact, our planning was mostly, well, what would happen if we had a grease fire in the kitchen, which is attached to our sanctuary, and that meant that everyone needed to exit quickly. But we knew that. And we knew that in the event of an attacker walking in the door, run, hide, fight was the mantra. And we knew that, again, because we had done the training over and over again. On that day, what really happened was we let in a stranger who appeared to be someone who needed help. It was very cold that day. He said he was homeless, that he was trying to get to a shelter. Could someone help? It was cold, so we invited him in. He made eye contact. He laughed. He was friendly. He didn't look like someone who was a threat, quite frankly. We've changed our protocol now. We wouldn't let him bring a backpack in, and we would have notified the police right away when someone comes up. But we don't want to change from being that welcome the stranger community that we are. It's a balancing act. Now, where did the training come in? As soon as he pulled the gun and started screaming, I knew to start moving toward the exit. I moved from the center of the synagogue to an aisle and was lined up with one of the exit doors. When he said for us to get down, this is early in the day, not at the end. When he said for us to get down, I got down in more of a catcher's crouch, on your toes, not on your knees, with one leg ready to push toward the door. If he had started shooting, I would have been behind one of the chairs and climbed toward the exit. That was my training. That was what we all will learn from training like what's offered by SCN. And that's what we need to do to act. Furthermore, throughout the day, we made a point of talking with him, answering him, being, subservient and being friendly, but keeping him engaged and not being in his face or attacking. We're going to see some of that stuff later. But throughout the day, when he let us go to the bathroom or go to the kitchen to get a drink, did notice, the knives are right there. The fire extinguisher is right there. One of the other hostages who got him a cup of tea got it extra hot with the idea of throwing it on him, but we weren't able to get close enough. You have to continually assess. And that's what we were able to do. And it is a long day. 1 hour is long. 11 hours is extremely long. The only other thing that is really important is throughout the day, there were a couple of other opportunities when we could have escaped, perhaps not as safely as we were toward the end, but we could have escaped, but we never thought, or at least I never thought of a simple thing. Run, yelling now. We would have known, even though we had not communicated among each other what to do, by bringing everyone over to the exits, by being prepared, by being within literally 10 feet, 3 steps from a doorway to get out, we were able to save ourselves. So again, training, preparedness, thinking about these things, keeping your head, staying as calm as you can, no matter how hard your heart is beating, no matter how high your blood sugar goes, you can keep yourself alive and escape. Unless there's something, Brad or Michael or anyone else that you want me to cover, I'm going to pass the baton to I guess, over to you, Brad.
Jeff, thank you very much. And I know you're going to stay with us for the Q&A and the panel session we're going to have towards the end. Thank you very much, sir. We really appreciate your time, and we'll see you at the end of the program as well. It's now my pleasure to introduce our 2 speakers that are going to provide the guidance today that everyone's going to have the ability to have. I want to introduce 2 of our security directors, Jewish communal security directors, Sean Brokos, who is from Pittsburgh, a longtime FBI agent, and retired and took over the position in Pittsburgh to secure the Jewish community there. And Beth Lamana, also retired and then went and took over to start a program for the Jewish community in Las Vegas. And when introducing both of these experts to our panel today, I just want to put everything in context. Both Beth and Sean are certified crisis negotiators. And for the folks that are attending this webinar, that is probably one of the most arduous trainings you can go through within the FBI to become certified in crisis negotiation. So Beth and Sean both went through that extensive training. Each have also trained others in local and state law enforcement to also become crisis negotiators. And they are part of a team when they were in their respective state federal law and officials that are crisis negotiators. Also both have actually worked on actual real life hostage situations. So we're very pleased and honored to have them in the ranks of our Jewish communal security programs protecting us. With that, Abby, can you please pull up the PowerPoint for us?
Absolutely, Brad.
And we have a 2-page document, if you can go right to the QR code that everybody, and we'll keep that on the screen for a moment. You can take a picture of that and get the actual 2-page guide to surviving a hostage situation. And with that, I will turn it over to Sean and Beth to take us through the actual training portion. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you, Brad.
Beth, you're on mute.
Sorry, got it. I was saying thank you very much, Brad, for the kind introduction. It really is truly an honor to be here. I know speaking for myself, and I think I can speak for Sean on this, crisis negotiations and teaching and training, especially on how to survive hostage situations, is something we're both incredibly passionate about and was a major part of our law enforcement careers. I also want to extend my appreciation and thanks to Jeffrey Cohn, because Jeffrey really epitomizes what it means to be a true survivor. And I think it's important to clarify that when we're talking about survivors, we're not just talking about an individual who can survive the actual incident, but the individual who in the aftermath is able to return and live their best and most productive lives. And while none of us ever expect to be taken hostage, and the possibility, while statistically small, it still does exist. We saw that play out 1 year ago in Colleyville, Texas. And as Michael talked about, given the most complex and dynamic threat environment facing us now, with the increase in terrorism and the increase in criminal activities, the use of hostage taking can play a key role for bad actors to gain notoriety, as well as to influence others to engage in bad and similar acts. So similar to how we talk in SCN always talks about the importance of training and training on how to respond to an active threat situation, preparation and training for how to respond to a hostage situation is just as critical. And we've seen it play out time and time again, from Pittsburgh to Colleyville. Training saves lives and increases our chance of survival. Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can introduce the very impactful video clip.
Great. Thank you, Beth, and good afternoon, everyone. Like Brad said, Beth and I were negotiators for a large part of our bureau career. And during my time in Pittsburgh at the Pittsburgh FBI field office, I led our team. We had multiple call outs, sometimes a week, a month, a year. We also would support the city and the county in various crisis incidents. Some resolutions were peaceful and some were gut-wrenching. But at the end of the day, our goal is preservation of life and a peaceful resolution. And before I get into the heart of our presentation, I do want to play a brief news clip to take us back to the events of that Saturday, Shabbat, nearly a year ago at Congregation Beth Israel. I know we heard from Jeffrey, but I think of a short video just showing a visual depiction of what it looked like there that morning. So I'd like to play that. And this is when an armed gunman, just like Jeffrey said, who initially appeared as a homeless male in need of help, took the rabbi, Mr. Cohen, and the other congregants hostage. So Abby, if you can play the video, please.
Few seconds, he got up and started yelling, "I've got a bomb."
Jeff Cohen came to pray and became a hostage.
My phone was sitting next to me and I quickly dialed 911.
People watching the live stream could hear the gunman.
Hostage, I'm going to come in and I'm going to die. I'm going to die at the end of this, all right?
We believe there to be one individual that is holding people hostage inside Beth Israel congregation.
The hostage standoff lasted for nearly 11 hours, while FBI Special Agent in Charge Matthew DeSarno's team negotiated with the gunman.
He was demanding the release of a convicted al-Qaeda terrorist who was housed nearby.
He believed that coming in here and attacking Jews, that the Jews controlled everything, so they would make it happen. Jews control the government, Jews control the banks, Jews control the media. He truly believed this.
So Mr. Cohen and his fellow congregants survived that day. They relied on their training, just like you heard him say, planning, mindset. They committed to action. They took action. They successfully escaped. And this is not a knock on law enforcement at all. Law enforcement was there in droves and had a significant presence, but the escape is credited to Mr. Cohen, the rabbi, and the individuals in that room who knew what to do. And so today we want to share some important tips and takeaways to help you survive in the event you ever find yourself in this type of situation. Abby, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So again, the goal is to help you survive a hostage incident if it should happen to you. And if you want to forward it again, Abby, I just want to cover, these are some of the learning objectives we'll talk about. And if you want to take a minute and just read through them, defining what a hostage incident is, identifying practical steps to take at the onset, and then we'll talk about during the hostage incident itself. And then at the resolution, we're going to break it into 3 different phases and talk about each phase and what each phase looks like. And while some of the things we may mention may seem like common sense, we're going to share with you what really goes on behind the scenes. Beth and I have been through many type of critical situations. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes with law enforcement, the negotiators, and the individuals involved in the crisis situation, the hostage situation. So we're hoping that an inside look will really help provide a better understanding of what happens, and most importantly, what you can do to survive armed with the knowledge that we're going to share with you. So we're going to start by defining what a hostage situation is. So this is a bit nuanced, but as we talk through it, our hope is that you'll better understand why we're defining this and some of the important distinctions between what a true hostage situation is, such as Congregation Beth Israel. That's exactly what fits the definition of a true hostage situation, versus something we call a non-hostage situation. So Beth, if you'd like to go into this in more detail, please.
Thanks, Sean. Absolutely. So before we define, as Sean said, what a hostage situation is, which is really the reason that we are here today, we need to really differentiate between 2 types of basic situations where individuals are being held against their will. The first type is the non-hostage or crisis type situation. And in this situation, the hostage taken often has a pre-existing relationship with one or more of the hostages, which in many ways in this situation can be defined as a victim, or the individual is experiencing and acting on a personal type of grievance. These situations are very, very much emotionally driven, such as you'd see in a workplace violence situation or a domestic situation that's gone bad. Typically, in these type of situations that are emotionally driven, you're not going to see those substantive type of demands, other than, for example, for the hostage taker to want law enforcement to go away. And the reason for this is the hostage taker has exactly what he wants. He has his hostage and his victim, and he doesn't need anything else from law enforcement. This is the type of situation, the crisis situation, that's much more common for law enforcement to deploy to. But it also has the potential to be much more dangerous because the crisis negotiators have less control to exert over these situations because we don't see the typical quid pro quo bargaining. And you may often see the result of there's an increased frequency of it resulting in a homicide followed by a suicide. But again, today's focus is on the true hostage situation. And that situation would be defined as persons who are held against their will as leverage to force the fulfillment of specific demands with the threat of harm or death coming to them if these demands are not met. Abby, could you click it again, please? Thank you. So in the true hostage situation, such as Colleyville or what you might see in a foiled robbery, the motivation is goal-oriented. The hostage taker wants or needs something from law enforcement and is going to use the hostages as leverage in this quid pro quo bargaining type of arrangements. Having their demands met is their primary motivation, not harming the hostages. And in fact, the hostage taker will ultimately recognize very early on that if any harm comes to the hostages, it's likely going to force a very quick tactical response. So the key takeaway is that while the non-hostage or crisis situation is much more common, it's also much more dangerous. whereas the hostage situation has more of a potential through the quid pro quo bargaining to exert control and work to that peaceful and safe resolution. Sean, I'm going to pass it on to you to talk about some of the statistics.
Thank you, Beth. So on a national level, we use a database called HOBIS, which is the Hostage Barricade database, in which law enforcement, local, state, and other federal feed into this. And it helps us better track what we're seeing nationally as far as hostage and crisis type incidents. And Abby, if you want to go to the next screen, I just want to share some statistics with you. Beth defined a true hostage situation versus non-hostage. Again, non-hostage situations tend to be much more reactive. For example, if we're going to arrest an individual in his or her home, he refuses to come out and maybe takes a family member hostage. Much more reactive, typically non-hostage. Hostage is substantive demands. For example, I want the release of a federal inmate from a prison and I'm demanding that release. So what we see nationally, again, from the data from all law enforcement who provide this into our HOBIS database, is that of all critical incidents, very few of them, you can see 2.78%, are true hostage situations with a substantive demand. So they are very infrequent compared to the more reactive, more non-hostage or barricaded situations. So a bit of encouraging news of all statistics that we track. Very, very few, whether it's hostage or non-hostage situations, do result in death, and a few result in injury. That's not to say that it doesn't happen, but the majority of these situations do have a peaceful resolution. Again, whether it takes an hour, 11 hours, or sometimes days, sometimes weeks, depending on how long it takes. But I wanted to just share some of these national statistics to better show that these situations are very, very infrequent, the true hostage situations, and typically do have a peaceful resolution. So what we want to talk about next are the 3 phases. We want to break it out for you because each phase looks a little bit different. There's what we call the initial phase of the hostage incident, the middle phase, and then the resolution phase. And we want to make sure that, each phase comes with its own, certainly fears, concerns, anxieties, but we typically see that the initial phase and resolution phase are the most dangerous. That's where emotions are running rampant, whether it's the hostages, victims, or the hostage taker, and there are control issues. Who's in control? What's going on? And so those are typically the most dangerous of the 3, the initial resolution. But I'm going to turn it over to Beth to break each one out and discuss it a little bit further.
Thank you. Abby, next slide, please. So let's talk about what you can do. One more time, Abby, thanks. And you can continue to click on that, please. So as Sean broke it down, the first 15 to 45 minutes are what we consider the most dangerous, and it's also known as the takeover phase. The initial takeover is extremely dangerous, and the reason for that really is that there's a great deal of panic and confusion for all. Everyone involved is in a crisis situation. And this is true for not only the hostages and the hostage takers, but I'm sure Sean will attest, it's also true for first responders, crisis negotiators, and law enforcement when they're rolling up on a situation and not really understanding what it is that they're dealing with. So what are some of the things that we can do early on to try, if we're taken hostage, to try to minimize or mitigate the danger or the potential violence? Well, one of the things that we as negotiators recommend is to stay calm. It seems simple, but I can tell you it's a lot easier said than it's done. And one of the techniques that we often recommend is that slow and deep breathing. That helps increase the oxygen to our system and also enhances better decision-making capabilities. But one of the reasons that it's important to be calm is because when your stress levels are so high, you're experiencing what we often see as tunnel vision or auditory exclusion. And auditory exclusion is really diminished hearing, where the individual isn't able to focus on the auditory or visual cues around them in their environment. And this makes it very difficult to think rationally, to think logically, and to make the best decisions to help you survive and to protect yourself. We also, as negotiators, have a saying, calm is contagious. So if you can do so without jeopardizing your own safety, it's really helpful if you can help calm those around you, because the quicker that everybody reduces that emotionality, the negotiators can really get to work engaging the crisis, engaging the hostage taker, and doing the work to work towards that peaceful resolution. During this time, it's critically important that every hostage recognizes from the outset that the hostage taker is in charge. It's important to be compliant, be respectful, and not look to engage the hostage taker by threatening them, challenging them, acting belligerent or aggressive. And this is a time we also don't want anybody to stand out. We want you, for lack of a better way of describing it, as to be vanilla, to just kind of meld into the background, to take that middle stance. We don't want anybody on either extremes where you're so fearful or you're cowering so much that you're actually reinforcing the sense of power and potential aggression for the hostage taker. And whining and cowering can also become very much a nuisance to the hostage taker, thereby putting an additional target on your back. And conversely, we don't want anybody to act as the hero. But the most important bullet on this slide is something that Michael talked about and Jeffrey talked about. It's developing that survival mindset, that will to survive no matter what. That is so critical because no one knows how long these situations will last. It can be very protracted. As Sean mentioned, it could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be days. We saw it lasted 11 hours in Colleyville. So that will to survive no matter what is critical. Could you please move to the next slide, Abby? When we're talking about the middle phase, we're talking about post 45 minutes till the time of resolution. And this is really what I always consider the meat and potatoes phase. This is where most of the work is going to get done between the hostage taker and the crisis negotiators, working together through quid pro quo bargaining to try to resolve this as peacefully as possible. And what I also like to talk about during this phase is the fact that, I mean, frankly, we live in a microwave society. We all expect from the outset immediate results. There's little to no delay of gratification. So you can understand why hostage takers who are hostages who are fearing for their lives are expecting a quick or immediate resolution from law enforcement. And the problem with this is that, and this is one of the things that's so important to understand, is that crisis negotiators, our primary goal is to slow things down, to stall and to buy time. And while this can be incredibly frustrating and counterintuitive to the hostage takers who are living through this stress and are fearing for their life, it actually makes a lot of sense. The more that time goes by, the greater opportunity for emotionality to move towards more normal levels of functioning, while rationality and cognitive processes can improve, enhancing more decision-making and better decision-making. So again, for the hostages during this time, it's that Goldilocks principle, which I talked about on the prior slide. We don't want anybody to be too cold where you're cowering and you're fearful and you're whining, nor do we want anybody to be too hot where you're challenging and aggressive and you're going to escalate an already potentially dangerous situation. We want you in that middle position, just right, being vanilla. During this time frame, it's also important to humanize yourself. If the negotiator provides you with the opportunity, I'm sorry, not the negotiator, if the hostage taker provides you with the opportunity to interact and engage with him, this is your opportunity to make yourself appear as a person with a family, with a background, with a job, with a place to return to and a life to go back to after this situation. Use your name. find ways to connect and commonalities that you might have. And likewise, try to avoid what we as negotiators often refer to as barbs, which are comments or things that are going to incite and escalate the situation for the hostage taker. Avoid trying to inject your own values or your judgments into this situation. And while you're doing so, one of the greatest ways of humanizing yourself is providing the opportunity to listen to the hostage taker. Actively listen. If the hostage taker is willing to tell you his story, let him tell it to you and encourage him to do so. Because the more time he's talking to you, the less time he has to hurt or engage in any violence towards you or anyone else. And in terms of paying attention, just like we at SCN and throughout the federations talk about when we're training, the importance of being situationally aware, knowing what's going on in your environment. It is so critical that if you're a hostage, that you start to immediately pay attention to not only your captors, but your immediate environment, to start to make those mental notes as to what the captors look like, how many of them are there, what type of weapons do they have, and how many weapons do they have? Are all the hostages in one location, or are they scattered throughout the building? This is all key information that will be very important to law enforcement should you have the opportunity to escape or be released. Additionally, it's important to locate early on any locations that may be able to be your safe place if the situation deteriorates. And likewise, any escape routes that might be possible should you have that opportunity. And Jeff talked about that he was looking around and he immediately moved to that exit door and crouched down in a position ready to jump up and move if necessary. And if the situation deteriorates to the point where you feel that you're in imminent danger, make sure that you've identified potential weapons that you can use to fight for your life. Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you to continue with the middle phase, please.
Thanks, Beth. So Beth talked about the meat and potatoes, and I'm going to talk about the secret sauce here. So what you see on the screen is really what negotiators are taught and trained on constantly. It's called the behavioral change stairway. And it is really used in the art of negotiation, whether it's a hostage situation or even any type of conflict resolution. But this staircase is so important because this really outlines the process for developing a relationship with the hostage and the negotiator, or in this case, it could be the congregants, right? There's a relationship that was developed, and at times that relationship made some progress, and at times there were issues that were stalling building that relationship. But ultimately, it should culminate in the negotiator, or again, the hostage, being able to influence the hostage taker. And this really does happen more than you know. And this is what happens behind the scenes when negotiators are really working with the hostage takers. So where you start, like Beth said, is listening, and it's actively listening. You are letting that hostage taker know that you hear them, you're being respectful, you're not challenging them, and you're using devices that we call, the various active listening skills, such as mirroring or paraphrasing. I hear what you say. I'm hearing what you say. I'm listening to you. You're not challenging. You're just letting them know that they've been heard. And that really is the building block to any type of relationship. But it's so important here, because then you can go on to work to develop some part of empathy. You don't have to sympathize with the situation, but you can identify with the emotions and try to hit on what that individual is going through. And then ultimately that leads you to building some sort of rapport. That's not to say you're friends. It's not to say that there's a trust set up. It's just to say from one person to another, I hear you, you've been heard. And when you get to that stage, that's when you can begin to influence behavior and then pose a behavioral change. hey, why don't you think about coming out? Let's go out and let's grab a cup of coffee and talk about this further. And I know it sounds, it sounds a bit funny, but that's a lot of what we do as negotiators. Hey, I hear you're in crisis. I think we have a lot to talk about. I'd really love to hear your story. I'd like for you to tell me more. And then, you go on and you pose that behavioral change. Can you come out? Let's try and work through this together. We're working through this as a team. But this staircase is very important. And there's times where you're going to go up it and you're going to come back down it. And sometimes you're going to say something like Beth mentioned barbs. We try and stay away from barbs, but we all will make comments that sometimes come out and you wish you hadn't said them. And when that happens, you go back just like you would in any other situation. I'm very sorry I said that. I didn't mean to upset you. What I meant by that was. And so you go back and you try and work your way back up the behavioral change staircase. What will impact this, though, I want to be very clear. The negotiators are going to be working on this, and as well as the hostages. And I know this is a lot of what Mr. Cohen and his fellow congregants were doing with the hostage taker. But there's also something that will impact this. It's called the action imperative. This work stops as soon as there is shots fired, let's say, or some injury or something that necessitates the action imperative. And that's where we have tactical elements always on standby, working hand in hand with negotiators, because we can work all we want on this, but if somebody's in harm's way, that's time for entry. So I want to point out that we are, as negotiators, or even if you are the hostage yourself working on this, this can change if there is that action imperative. And, again, the goal is for a peaceful resolution. And these are just some of the tools of the trade that Beth and I spent a long time learning about during our training, and then really worked very closely to train others on. So where we'd like to go now is we've shared some of the insight with you, but let's talk about resolution. There's different resolutions, 3 main types. We have release or surrender, in which either one hostage may be released, maybe they're all released, maybe there's a peaceful surrender and even the hostage taker himself comes out, again, with a peaceful resolution. If that's not the case, then there's the escape. And the picture here you see in front of you is a picture of the congregants escaping through that door at Congregation Beth Israel. You can actually see them coming out of that door in the middle photo. And then if escape is not possible, or let's say some have escaped, but the gunman is still in there, then there's a tactical intervention. So 3 distinct phases of resolution. Abby, if you want to go on to the next slide, please. So the first phase is release or surrender. So during this phase, it is so important to remember the notes. If you look at the notes, it's so important to look at what we have on the screen. First and foremost, again, this is such a confusing, stressful time for everyone, to include law enforcement. If there has been a negotiated release, please come out with your hands up, obeying all the commands, because law enforcement may not know. A lot of times negotiators will have a surrender or release, and sometimes the tactical folks may not know that this is happening, and they're going to see somebody coming out. They're not going to know, and they have to make that split-second decision. Is this friend or foe? And just like the picture shows, if you come up with your hands out, that is absolutely critical. Move very slowly and follow the instructions of law enforcement. Do exactly as they say. And then your goal, now that you're out, you go directly to law enforcement. You now become the eyes and ears. You are going to be debriefed and asked, what did you see? What did you hear? What room were you in? What kind of weapon was there? What did it look like? What did the individual look like? This is if you don't have benefit of cameras. We need to know all the ins and outs of the building, what is really happening. And that's where you become the law enforcement's key witness and such a critical asset. But it's important to remember when you're coming out, even if that release or surrender has been negotiated, the tactical folks may not know. And so they just come out as peacefully as possible and hands visible. So that's the release or surrender phase. And I do want to point out too, something really critical. We use this term all the time when we teach our run, hide, fight. Law enforcement, when they respond to a crisis situation, they can't see your halo. If you are the, friend versus foe, and you are coming out running at law enforcement, it's very hard for them to see your halo. It's very hard for them to make that split-second decision. Is this friend or foe? So whatever you can do to make that decision easier and eliminate the possibility that you are a threat is just essential. So Beth, I'll turn it over to you for the escape phase.
Thanks. As Sean explained, escapes can be just as dangerous, if not more so. And when you come running out of that crisis site, as Sean mentioned, law enforcement has no idea. They have little to no time to determine what your intentions are. Are you one of the good guys or the bad guys? And they need to make sure that you are not a threat. And so again, even if you are escaping, to the degree you can be mindful and have your hands visible, have them empty to help law enforcement determine that you're more likely not a threat and you are coming to them because you have escaped and you're released. But it may take some time for them to determine who are the good guys from who are the bad guys, because we've seen many situations where sometimes the hostage takers or some of the bad guys actually try to blend in and either escape or surrender along with the hostages. And so it takes some time to unpack the situation. Again, emotions are heightened for all involved, and that's what makes this incredibly dangerous. So if you're going to attempt an escape, we always caution that you do so if you think you can succeed, because you need to really think twice and consider what will happen to you if you fail, likewise, what happens to those hostages that are remaining in the crisis site if you succeed. But if you think you can attempt an escape and you can do so successfully, you need to commit to that action. There's a big difference between considering it and thinking it and actually doing it. And likewise, if you start to feel that your life is in imminent danger of harm or death, you also need to prepare yourself to fight and use whatever improvised weapons you have to fight for your life. And again, it's that committing to action. And again, fighting should always be a last resort. Sean, I'm going to turn it back to you for the last resolution.
So the last resolution is the tactical intervention. This is extremely dangerous, as you can imagine, because what is happening is that tactical element, whether it's hostage rescue team or the SWAT team, is making what we call a dynamic entry into the location. And again, their goal is to neutralize the threat. So that means they're going to come in a dynamic entry, pan the room, and have to make split-second decisions, again, on friend or foe. Who is the good guy? Who is the bad guy? So if you are in this type of situation, the first thing you want to do is get down to the floor, lay down, hands out. Make sure your hands are visible. That way, the SWAT operators can bypass you and keep working the room. And it may not be just one room. They may have to clear that entire building until they can really work to make sure they've neutralized the threat. I also want to point out too, this is important. This is going to be absolute sensory overload. It is going to be incredibly loud. There's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of sound. And I know we have tactical folks on this webinar today. today, so I won't go into detail, but oftentimes you can see smoke in this picture. They're going to throw a flashbang there. That's a distraction technique. And that is extremely loud, and you probably will have a hard time hearing after that. So there's so much sensory overload. So the point of, the tactical intervention is for those elements, the SWAT or HRT elements, to get in, neutralize the threat, render everybody else safe, but get on the floor. And I do think there's points on this slide, Abby, if you want to advance it. Yeah, exactly what's set up there. Empty hands above your head, and then follow commands of law enforcement and just stay put until the situation's resolved, and then they'll come back for you. This is this is, from a negotiator perspective, this is typically what we don't want to have happen. Now, if you talk to our SWAT and HRT counterparts, this is what they do want to have happen. And sometimes there's a lot of tension because they want to make entry and resolve this. And we as negotiators are stalling for time, just like Beth had pointed out on that emotional teeter-totter, where as time goes on, emotionality typically does resolve a bit and the rational operating level does come back. But if that's not possible, tactical interventions are extremely realistic. They do happen. They're very dangerous. So as a hostage or victim, please just do everything that we've gone through on this slide. So I'll turn it back over to you, Beth. I think we're wrapping this up now.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of material today on practical steps on how to best survive a hostage situation, how to avoid making yourself an unnecessary target. But if you can take two major points from this presentation, one is the critical importance of developing that survival mindset, understanding the situation may be protracted, but no matter what, you're going to do it, you need to do to survive and live through it to see another day. And the other thing is our mantra: commit to action. Whether you're going to hide, whether you're going to fight, whether you're going to run, whether you're going to escape, commit to that action. Please stay safe and be well. And thank you for joining us today. Brad, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Beth, Sean, thank you very much. Please stay on. And just one administrative note for you both. My internet may be a little unstable. I'm traveling. I'm in a hotel room. If you see me freeze, please just yell it out. I'll go off screen and we will continue on and I'll ask the questions off camera. So with that, I'd like to bring in John Pizer. And Jeff, if you can come back on the screen as well, sir. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce John Pizer, who's going to come on here in a second. John Pizer is one of our SCN regional directors. John is responsible for the Northeast. John has expertise after a very long and illustrious career in the FBI as a operator for the hostage rescue team in Quantico, Virginia. And John, thank you for joining the panel and the conversation. I really want to start with you because we ended with that tactical intervention. There were a lot of questions in the chat room about that and what that looks like. As a former member of the hostage rescue team, and actually you were on duty when Colleyville happened, could you really talk about that law enforcement response and what does it look like when law enforcement actually breaches that area to rescue those hostages?
Hey, Brad, thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, I actually was serving on the hostage rescue team at that time. I'd spent 15 years with the team. I was not actually on the ground during Colleyville last year. My position at the time was unit chief of the operational support unit. So in charge of rapid deployment logistics, advanced technology, and enhanced communication units. So very involved in the front end with coordinating and organizing HRT elements to get out the door. On that day, I was largely responsible for coordinating FBI air assets, mobilizing pilots, crew, and aircraft to fly the team down to the crisis site and getting team members and their gear and equipment, specialized gear and equipment on the scene. I did want to jump on to some things that Beth and Sean talked about the tactical assault being the most dangerous time. I think next to the initial takeover, the tactical assault is the most dangerous time. So the tactical operators from any SWAT team or tactical team, from any agency or police department or any jurisdiction, are going to be conducting that tactical assault or hostage rescue. They're going to be in an extremely high state of readiness. They're going to be super amped up. Their adrenaline's going to be pumping, and they're going to be fully focused on the extremely dangerous, challenging task of finding and neutralizing that threat. So they'll be moving, as Sean and Beth talked about already, moving quickly and deliberately through the crisis site. And whatever that venue is, whether it's a large building, a school, or a synagogue in this case. So they're searching for the threat to neutralize that threat. Their priority is to stop that threat. That is their absolute priority. So tactical team members will be processing things very quickly, making rapid decisions about whether to shoot or not shoot based on what they're seeing and what they're processing. Another point that was brought up that was excellent is they don't know who you are. They can't see your halo. I think Sean said that. You could be a bad guy. They don't know. So please keep that in mind as they process and make those decisions. The first thing they're going to be looking for is what's in your hands. So from their training and experience, they know that that is where a weapon will be. So have nothing in your hands. Show them your empty hands. No cell phones in your hands, no articles of clothing, no bags or purses, absolutely nothing in your hand that can be confused as a weapon. Your hand should be up and empty, and make it easy for them to process that information and make good decisions. Follow their commands. We've also heard that as well. They're likely to be telling you to show your hands and get down on the ground or the floor, and maybe they may ask you to walk out to them. If you're in hiding, if you're in a closet space or a classroom, they may ask you to come out to them. So do not move quickly at that point, and do not move furtively. Move deliberately with your hands up and visible while you do all your movements. It's very important not to make any quick, rapid, furtive movements that can be mistaken for something else. Be aware that they will not be stopping at this point to render first aid. It will be sensory overload. They're not going to be rendering first aid to wounded individuals or rendering assistance or answering questions. None of that is happening at this point. Their priority is to find and neutralize that threat and stop whatever violence is going on. They may conduct what's called a quick pat-down search of you as you go by them. They're just searching for weapons. Most likely that would be in areas immediately accessible to your hands, what we call in law enforcement the high-risk area. So you may get that. Different teams do different things, but you may actually get a quick pat-down search of your waistband area as you go by them and they proceed deeper into the venue. I do know, I'll share a few pieces of information about what happened that day. I do know that our tactical team leaders used the floor plans that they were given while en route to help with the planning. So get the floor plans that you have to your facility, to your SCN representative, to your law enforcement contacts, so they have them before a crisis occurs. And in this case, that happened. That's part of your emergency operations planning. That's part of your TVRA process, your threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment process. And if you get floor plans electronically, that's even better, because then they can be sent directly to law enforcement or a tactical team, and they can help, greatly assist them with their planning. Also, another point that was made earlier, our HRT tactical team leaders used information provided by one of the hostages who had been released a little bit earlier to help them with their planning process, give them critical up-to-date information about what is actually happening on that crisis site. If you do happen to be a hostage in a situation like this, don't shut down. Be focused, have that survival mindset. What Jeff has talked about here and others have mentioned, have that survivor mindset. Absolutely be committed to surviving. Have keen attention to detail. Be focused and attentive. Keep busy with that. right? What we in law enforcement call is situational awareness. I know we've talked about that already. Be extremely observant. If you happen to be released or you escape, you can provide critical information to law enforcement about that subject's actions, his behavior, how many of them there are, is he communicating with other people, et cetera, et cetera. That's critical information that law enforcement will use in their tactical plan. And I guess Brad, I'll end finally by saying, I urge folks to cultivate that mindset of readiness and preparedness and that survivor mindset, which we've talked about. Think about the unthinkable before it happens. Attend the active shooter training or the counteractive threat training that's being offered. Take it seriously. Plan for contingencies and emergency events to occur. It does not mean you have to live your life in a crisis mode, but just know that one can happen at any time. Be ready for that and have a plan.
John, thank you very much for that conversation on that tactical intervention. It's so important and so dangerous if it gets to that. We have a lot of questions in the chat room, and I'm going to try to collapse a few of them so we can get through as many as we can and hit some of the high points.
Brad, do you mind if I address a couple things first?
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
The first thing, there's a lot of questions about concealed carry. I am not law enforcement, never have been, and I'm not military, but I love shooting sports and I carry a concealed carry permit and have for years. I most often do not carry. Had I had a gun that day, all I would have succeeded in doing is get someone else killed. Okay. It takes a long time, 500 to 750 milliseconds, to get the gun out of your pocket, to get the safety off, to get the first round chambered, and then it has to be a kill shot because I have one shot and it has to kill. All the other guy has to do, he's got lots of shots. He's already got the gun out. It's already pointed at people and he doesn't have to kill. All he has to do is wound. So think a little bit and stop being a cowboy. The second thing is we waited 11 hours. We waited until our attacker devolved. Throughout the day, he was relatively calm, and we got him to that point by negotiating with him and using the FBI negotiator, and before that, the 911 operator. So time is to your advantage far more than it is to your attackers. The more time we allow, the more time for other folks to get into position. Those are the two main things. I guess the other thing I did want to say is someone asked about thanking law enforcement. You know, this is the only one of the public events that I've done where I didn't start by thanking law enforcement, and I guess I should have done that. You know, the Colleyville police, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the other TLAs were amazing. And everything you see on TV is not what happens. There was not a jurisdictional fight. When the special agent in charge came into the Colleyville Police Department, he said, "I'm here. Where do you want me? Who can I bring?" It wasn't, "We're here to take over." The negotiator was not fighting constantly with the Hoskew Restage team or the others that were trying to get in. Quite the opposite. They were trying to put things off for as long as possible until the moment when we all knew that he devolved. And that's when they chose to move in.
Jeff, thank you so much. And we really appreciate your comments and your perspective on that. Beth, we're going to go through kind of the lightning round of questions here. Let's just talk for a moment if there are numerous hostages. And I know people ask all the time, well, if I'm thinking about my own survival, is it selfish for me to escape? And what harm may I be putting other hostages in if I escape on my own? You're on mute, Beth.
Thanks. Sorry about that. That's a great question, Brad, because that's a question that we receive almost in every training that we do. And the reality is, and the answer is, every situation is different and it's a personal decision. But just like we teach in the in training to respond to an active assailant or an active threat situation, if you can get out, get out. Survival is not selfish. And I'm going to repeat that again. Survival is not selfish. If you got to do what's best for you, and it's also important to keep in mind, just like Sean had mentioned during the PowerPoint, when you get out, it's not like you're going home at the end of the night to have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and a nice dinner. You become a key asset for law enforcement, for the negotiators, for the tactical team, to be able to provide them with every insight, every overhear that you've heard, locations. You are still on the site, on scene, helping them help everybody that remains in the crisis site to survive.
Beth, thank you very much. And Sean, I'm going to move to you with the next question. In one, I think it's very fair to level set to summarize the entire presentation that you and Beth did, and to say what this presentation is not. We are not here to teach people to be crisis negotiators like you and Beth. We are teaching people survival tips. So you talked briefly, Sean, about talking to the hostage taker and what happens if you say something that angers that hostage taker. Can you kind of take us through that a little bit more and talk about what the hostage should do to rectify if he or she makes the hostage taker angry?
Right, yeah, and boy, this happens a lot with negotiators. There are times when you're going to say something that the hostage taker is going to find offensive, upsetting, and maybe will anger him or her. Our role is to de-escalate. So like you would in any other type of relationship where you have said something that you see upset somebody, you apologize for that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I see that I've upset you. And so you own it. You don't try and deny that you said it. You don't make excuses. You try and de-escalate as best as possible. After, whether it's 11 hours or 11 minutes, there are things that are going to be said that are going to be upsetting, but your role is to try and be as human as possible. And like Beth said, use that individual's name, ask him or her to call you by name, try and really humanize yourself, humanize them, be very much cognizant, understanding that they're going through a really tough time as well. That's not to say, the focus should be solely on them, but recognize that this is a crisis event for them as well as it is for you. And if something is said, hey, I apologize, I misstated that, I didn't mean to offend you. Can I try that again? Do you mind if I ask you that in a different way? Anything you can do to just try and de-escalate the situation.
Sean, thank you very much. And I'll open this question up to Sean or Beth, because I think we get this question a lot when we talk about countering the active threat in our active shooter training. As a hostage, is there any different guidance for folks that have disabilities or children? So how do we respond to the folks that may be in wheelchairs, may have walkers, and what does those instructions look like, and are they different?
So Sean, if you don't mind, I'll jump in and then you can follow up and finish it off, as they say. The answer to that is it's the same type of situation that we train for when responding to an active threat. You're going to do the same thing. Your decision, if you have some type of handicap, or if you're wheelchair bound, or if you have children, you may not be in a position to easily escape, or you may not be in a position to easily fight, but you have to do what you have to do to survive. What you can do from the outset is to identify in that room, where is the safest place, so that if the situation does devolve, if it does deteriorate, you can make yourself the least amount of it. You cannot make yourself a target, minimize your opportunity to make yourself a target and to hide. But at the end of the day, if it's a situation where you have to fight for your life, look for whatever it is, whether it's that cup of coffee, that cup of tea that Jeffrey talked about, whether it's a fire extinguisher. You do what you have to do. And it's not an easy question to answer, because it's a very difficult situation. So I hope that's somewhat helpful.
Sean, any follow-up?
I'll just add to, exactly what Beth said. And it's very much like when we teach run, hide, fight in a school environment. If we're teaching the teachers and staff, you're responsible for those children. Instead of running out the side door, you need to focus on those children and getting them to safety. So that means finding that place where you can barricade. Where can you lock down? Where can you make yourself invisible? So instead of being in that situation and trying to figure out potential escape routes for you, you're thinking maybe where is there a room if I can just get out of this one room and go to another room where I can lock the door until law enforcement is ready to make entry. Just somewhere you can get away with children or help somebody who has a mobility issue to get to a place of safety. And if you can at least get to a place of safety, the negotiators are going to hear that. They're going to hear the hostage taker getting frustrated. Where have you gone? I can't find you. And this really does happen. I mean, we have this in real life hostage incidents, and you hear the hostage taker start getting frustrated, aggravated. That's a cue to the tactical team that it may be time to make entry. So whether you're with children or somebody who has a mobility issue, if you can get to that place of safety, that buys you time again until that tactical element comes in, or maybe the hostage loses interest in you and goes back to other hostages that are in the room and trying to control them. So, but we recognize that escape is not possible if you have children or mobility issues. Not always. I mean, there may be some times where you can get yourself and kids out a side door. We recognize that may not be possible too.
Sean, thank you. And we have a few more questions, and I'm going to open up this question again, just for Sean and Beth. The same thing, same lines. We teach countering active threat training. We teach everybody that survival is solely dependent on your own actions. However, we get the question all the time, and we have a rabbi that asked the question today. I'm a rabbi, I'm a leader of the congregation. How am I going to not stand out? So we get that question from our school administrators, our rabbis, and let's talk about, in that hostage situation, how do we not stand out as a leader? And what advice would you give that rabbi or that school administrator for trying to diminish their role somewhat, not to be in the fray?
I would say, well, I mean, one of the things that we talk about quite a bit is whether you're a rabbi in a position of religious leadership, faith-based leadership, if you're a member of law enforcement who ends up getting caught in a foiled robbery, a bank robbery, it's whatever you can to remove anything that unnecessarily identifies you as that position in a leadership position. That's one of the things. Remove whatever article of clothing you can so that you can kind of be that vanilla and just kind of be that middle of the road person, fade into the gray. The other thing that's really important to consider with this is also, if you are a leader, that calm is contagious. Your congregation and the people around you are going to be looking to you for cues. And it's really important that you maintain, more than anybody, that survival mindset to help those around you stay calm, think as clearly as they can. And if you're in a group, start talking about what you're going to do if you have an opportunity to escape, if you need to start to hide, work together.
Beth, thank you very much. Sean, any follow-up or?
I would just say, going back to what Beth said, if the goal is to make yourself vanilla, right? So you don't stand out, but people are going to stand out. If you're the rabbi or if you're law enforcement and you're in that room, you do become that de facto leader. And what you will be placed in a position where that hostage taker is going to be looking for you. And so will the other hostages. And that's where those active listening skills and just trying to humanize that relationship is absolutely essential. And I know, I had heard the rabbi from Colleyville speak several times. He said, as a rabbi, we're trained in this. We're trained to talk to people. We're trained to deal with people in crisis. And it may come down to that. So you may be put in that position. One thing that I think is so important, though, if you are in that position and other hostages are looking to you, really use those nonverbal skills. Look at the other hostages, try to reassure them, try and use the simple nod of your head. I hear you, I see you. I think those are very important, also very reassuring. And we're also asking you to do something that's extremely difficult. We're saying, try and be calm and talk to somebody calmly when you're at a very high crisis, a very high operating level. It's hard, we know, but if you're in a leader position or a position where you have become that de facto leader, you will be called upon to use those active listening skills and be as patient and as, again, just as human as possible to try and keep that relationship going until you stall for time. Remember, the goal is just you are buying time until law enforcement can better assess the situation and figure out a resolution. So I know it's not easy, but it's a very much reality.
And
Great.
I'd like
Thank you
to
very
add,
much.
Others.
Go ahead,
can-
Jeff.
I'd like to add that others can and need to do that same thing. You know, when the rabbi gets flustered, when the cantor gets flustered, because it's a long, arduous day for us. You know, someone else needs to pick it up. The more people that are talking to him on a first name basis, you know, that helps. He referred to the first person release, our older, significantly older congregant. He said, you know, yeah, I'm going to let him go. He reminds me of my dad. That personalization, because we kept it going, that got one person out the room, okay, and it enabled the rest of us to get a little bit closer together. And quite frankly, the three of us could run, and the third guy not so much. So that was a critical moment.
Again,
have to keep aware.
Thank you very much.
just to add to that, Mr. Cohen, you hit such a key point, because what you identified right there is something we call a hook, right? As soon as he said, "You remind me of my father," well, then that's an indicator that, you know, presumably his father is somebody important to him. He's somebody elderly. You know, maybe that gives you room to talk about that. And so, Mr. Cohen, if that's something you picked up on, then maybe another question is, tell us more about your father. You know, again, if it's appropriate, but I think that's something that definitely helps humanize this a bit more. Anytime you can find those hooks and things that he says, that whether it's the rabbi picking up on that or Mr. Cohen, and making that a possible conversation point to help de-escalate things.
I'll add
Perfect.
the FBI negotiator picked up on some of those too and did some of that as well.
It takes a village.
John, I want to ask you one quick tactical question. We teach encountering active threat, run, hide, fight. Fight being the last resort. So in the Colleyville situation, we teach the fight portion between distraction and control. In Colleyville, the rabbi threw a chair, which is the distraction technique. Can you walk through very quickly kind of the perils and pitfalls of the control, that swarming technique actually attacking the hostage taker, the perpetrator, as opposed to trying to escape with a distraction technique?
Yes, sir. So I would say in those instances, when the opportunity presents itself and you're looking for that right opportunity, you're looking to initiate that action with any weapon of opportunity that you have at your disposal. We've mentioned a little bit of that here, whether that's a fire extinguisher or a chair in this case, whatever you can get your hands on. And also initiate that with numbers, if you can, with a group effort rather than one person. If you can get communication amongst the group, you would want to try to initiate that together so you're overwhelming that person. And you want to go after the weapon. If you've got to pinpoint a location for your attack, go after the weapon. So you want to separate that person from the weapon, or at least deflect it, which gives you time then to subdue that person or control them. And then hopefully law enforcement is in tuned enough, whatever they've got, maybe they've got some listening devices inside, whatever they've got technology wise, they know what's going on inside. And hopefully, again, we've talked about this, buying time. And that might buy you the time you need to survive.
John, thank you very much. We had one more question, and I'm just going to go more as a statement. A couple of our folks talked about, we always
Brad, you're going off again.
welcoming environment in the Jewish community, and we talk about that. we talk about that warm and welcoming atmosphere for the Jewish community, and really to balance that access control with warm and welcoming. So I know that is a difficult question, but I think we all know that we need to have those access control procedures in place. Colleyville was a success story, even though the individual was invited in. It's what Jeff Cohen, Rabbi, and the other hostages did afterwards during that crisis that saved their lives. Jeff, I want to give you the last word, sir. After listening to Sean, Beth, John, is there anything different you would have done? But more importantly, what's the one major takeaway everybody on this call should do to keep themselves safe in this hostage situation? If you could sum it up very briefly in your experience.
Well, in my experience, you need to plan and you need to train. Keep in mind that run, hide, fight, and you balance those things. But since it's far more likely that someone's going to be on the outside of the building rather than on the inside, keep your expletive deleted mouth shut. Do not talk to the media. The two former congregants who spoke to the media in our event, one criticized our attacker on CNN, which we could have been, which it was likely he would have read, and the other told about where the exits were. Both things put people at danger. Keep your mouth shut.
Jeff, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody that participated today. I want to thank Diane, Julie, and of course, Michael for providing comments at the beginning. We appreciate everybody's time and attendance here today. And I think I'll end with what Sean and Beth said. Calm is contagious. I think I'm going to use that a lot now, and I think it's very appropriate in this situation. Please, if anybody has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us anytime at SCN. We will be getting back to everybody soon with our next webinar in our series. Please know that this will be recorded and sent out. With that, thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and please stay safe.